So at this time, I would like to introduce you all to a very, very special, amazing woman. Um, we are going to be able to have an opportunity to speak to Dr. Doris Derby. Do you want to come up, Dr. Derby? I'm going to give you a brief background on Dr. Derby. Dr. Derby's association with the civil rights movement spans decades. She was a member of the NAACP youth chapter in her hometown at the age of 16 and connected with the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee while attending Hunter College in New York. She was on the front lines of the civil rights movement as a student activist, as young as you all. And wherever racism raised its ugly head, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee organized voter registration drives, self-help economic and educational initiatives, and carried out protests at such places as segregated local, statewide, and national government facilities, public movie theaters, parks, medical facilities, and churches. Dr. Derby primarily worked with SNCC in Albany, Georgia, New York, and throughout the state of Mississippi. And in 1963, she worked with the Adult Literacy Project to assist adults in gaining literacy skills for voter education and other areas needed for full citizenship participation. Dr. Derby left Mississippi in 1972 and eventually Georgia State University. And also, while she was in Mississippi, she also co-founded the Free Southern Theater, which brought free theater to African Americans in Mississippi and other parts of the South. And the theater's purpose was to expose people to critical issues dealing with civil rights. So, at this time, I would just like to thank Dr. Derby for being here. Can we all give her a round of applause? All right, Dr. Derby, and I want to just begin by asking you a very basic question. Can you please explain to us why you came down to Mississippi at such a young age to fight for civil rights?
Well, as you mentioned, I did join the NAACP when I was 16, the youth chapter. There was discrimination in the North as well as in the South. My father was a college graduate. He graduated as the only black student in civil engineering from the University of Pennsylvania. But when he got out, it was very hard for him to find a job in engineering. And when he did get a job in engineering, he could not use his name on his drawings and his work. He had to use the name of his boss. Well, he got tired of that, and he took a job with the New York State Employment Service. The New York State Employment Service, he found, along with some others in the Employment Service, found that there was discrimination in the New York State Employment Service. Now, you would think that there was not any discrimination because that's the North. That was New York, where I'm from. And the discrimination was not throughout. It was on the managerial level. They discriminated when there was an oral exam for the managerial positions. So my father, along with 3 other employees, founded an organization called the New York State Careerists Organization to fight discrimination in the civil service. That was in the late 50s, and my father and the other 2 or 3 people would have their meetings at my house. So right there, I could see that it was important to know what was happening around you on your job and in other places, and to take steps to fight the discrimination. As a college student at Hunter College, from 1957 to 1962, there were a group of us who decided that we were going to support the students in the South who were trying to integrate the facilities, demonstrating at the lunch counters, the Freedom Riders, etc. And so that was the beginning of my affiliation, direct and indirect, with SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee.
Wonderful. And as you all are listening to us, you'll see on these different screens, these are all photographs that Dr. Derby took herself while she was working in the South as a SNCC worker and thereafter. So not only was she an activist and giving up her time and efforts and her energy, she also documented the movement as well. Now, Dr. Derby, can you share your experience with such things as the literacy test while you were in Mississippi?
Well, I was recruited by Bob Moses, who was the first person in Mississippi to start a movement against the whites for the discrimination in terms of voting. He started the voter registration drive throughout the state of Mississippi, organizing individuals through SNCC and other local organizations. And so I was recruited by him as in that 1962, I became a teacher, an elementary school teacher. And he learned about me as we were organizing for the March on Washington. So he asked me if I would come to Mississippi and work on this literacy project. At that time, I said, well, no, I really have some other plans. I'm not really ready to go to Mississippi. But I'll tell you, that was the spring of 1963. And people were organizing, and I was a part of that group, organizing for the March on Washington. And in the spring, in May, we saw the photographs on TV and in the newspapers that the violence, the dogs, the fire hoses, the billy clubs against men, women, and children who were demonstrating for the right to vote, for the right to eat in desegregated facilities. They were taken off to jail, they were injured, and when I saw that, I said the least I can do is go to Mississippi and work in a literacy project. And that was the beginning of my stay in Mississippi. I went for 1 year and I ended up staying for 9 years.
That's amazing. Wow. And Dr. Derby, what do you think is the most valuable lesson or the most valuable takeaway that our audience of these young, amazing people, what can they take away from today's program and what they've learned throughout this exercise and these experiences?
I think you should really take to heart everything that was said at this meeting. As Lula just mentioned, the voting rights can be taken away again. Now you see what had happened all along from the 1800s, 1700s, 1900s in terms of our right to vote. This is the key for us to have our own self-development and also our freedom. And it can be taken away at any time. There are a lot of ways to do that, indirect and direct. So you all have to vote. There are a lot of people who lost their lives, who were injured, who were jailed and still are fighting those records. You need to continue on. And through my photographs, I show you that there are people from all walks of life, entertainers, educators, lawyers, teachers, who got involved in the civil rights movement. So there are many ways that you can be involved, and you need to stay involved. You need to do things that you can do to make sure that our freedom is not taken away, because there are people who still want to do that. And I'm sure if you watch MSNBC and you watch the news and you listen to John Lewis and others, you will be able to see every day the ways in which our rights are slowly being eroded.
Okay. Thank you so much. And now I want to be able to offer some of you all the opportunity to ask Dr. Derby a question, either about what she said, about her experience. So is there anyone in the audience that would like to have the opportunity to ask Dr. Derby a question? Okay.
What motivated you to keep on going?
Well, you know, my grandparents, I was very, very fortunate to have grandparents who talked about their struggles. They lived up in Boston, Massachusetts, and they fought discrimination. And then my father fought discrimination. And so I learned later on that my grandmother on my mother's side and her oldest son in Bangor, Maine, where you would not think that there were very many blacks, they were members of the founding organization of the NAACP in 1920. Now, I can't stop that trend. I have to keep the legacy of my relatives, my grandparents. I have to keep that legacy alive. I have to make sure that I keep the legacy of the civil rights movement alive and take it to another step. And that's where you all come in. You have to continue. You've heard what I've said today, and you keep this legacy going. Thank you.
One more question? Okay, we've got time for one more question. I think that.
You mentioned that you were asked to participate in the March on Washington. If you could go back, would you do any part of your involvement in the civil rights movement differently? Would you take that opportunity to become involved in the March on Washington, or stay involved in the areas that you were in?
Well, the March on Washington, that was the spring of 1963. In terms of participating in terms of as a volunteer doing logistics. And then the march took place in August, and I left for Mississippi after that. While I was in New York, I was teaching. I was also working for SNCC in my evenings and weekends, as well as a part of that working on the logistics for the March on Washington. I've always been a multitasker. I don't just do one thing. And so when I went to Mississippi, I was working the literacy project, but I also got together with a couple of guys, and we decided to start the Free Southern Theater. I also was organizing folk festivals where we brought together music, blues, and artwork and other aspects of Mississippi culture to showcase it and to have people come together. I was also working with SNCC with voter registration at the same time that year. And so I was so involved that I continued to be involved in other projects as they were coming. So I wouldn't do anything different. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, Dr. Derby. Thank you.
Can you all give Dr. Derby one more huge round of applause? We have a living legend in the house. Also, I really want you all to take the time to thank Lula for putting together that amazing exercise where you all were actually able to see a literacy test. You know, you hear about them, but you all were actually able to see the test to try to answer the questions. And so I want to thank you. I also want to thank our participants in Tifton and Savannah. Thank you so much for holding out and sticking with us through this entire day. Did you all enjoy yourselves today? Let me ask you that. I mean, this was a very diverse day in terms of all of the things that you all were able to do, and there was a lot of people here who worked really hard to make sure that you all were able to do it. Is Rita